Is the rapture this month, July 17th, 2019? God knows. I don't know. Did Pearl and Christine figure it out? My first Rapture watch date came when I was very young, and I had given my life completely over to God. I was raised Christian, raised Lutheran, baptized as an infant, though I got water baptized as a young adult too, because I wanted to do it because I wanted to. But I grew up believing in Jesus. I knew who he was. I loved him. I went to church all the time. But I arrived at a time when I asked the question, is there anything in my life between me and you? And he revealed that there was. And then I discovered what it means to die to yourself. So I had a choice set before me. I ultimately chose to do that, to die to myself. And he had promised me if I would do this, then he would disciple me, he would teach me. Because that was my fear. I had been in church my whole life. I hadn't really learned much. I just thought if you go to church and do the required beliefs, you'll go to heaven when you die. What's the problem? But I found out he wants more than that, and he wanted my whole life. He even laughed a little bit when I protested and said, that's my whole life. He said, yeah, it's kind of in my word that it says that. That's what it costs. You might have noticed that. I was protesting that I'd already done everything I thought was required and found out I hadn't done enough. So it's like, well, if I do that, that's my whole life. He said, yeah. But he promised me at length that if I did put him first, he would teach me. So ultimately I did. He did begin to teach me. And a funny thing happens, wherever your treasure is, that's where your heart is also. I found that my treasure was in heaven, not on this earth anymore. And I wanted to be in heaven. I started looking at rapture possible dates or possible timelines any chance I could. And the very first one that had any real substance to it, I mean, other than general, Jesus is coming, you get that all the time. We're talking, this all began for me around 1979, 1980. So, along comes Dr. Gene Scott, and he's teaching on amazing subjects on the air, on the radio and TV. And he was teaching on the Great Pyramid and how it was God's physical time capsule, word, God's word in stone. You want to look that up, go ahead. There's a lot of information about that. But he only took it so far, and then he stopped. And he did what he called dangling. He would leave you on the edge of some great revelation, and then he would say, tune in again next time, and he would dangle it. Well, Ralph Lyman was a man who listened to this, actually got saved as a result of listening to Gene Scott preaching on these subjects. But he was a brilliant mathematician and a brilliant thinker, and he took to studying this Great Pyramid in Egypt, the biggest one, the Great Pyramid, in the middle of the Earth's landmass, the biggest center of all the Earth's landmass is right there in the midst of the land of Egypt and at the border of Upper and Lower Egypt. So it's Isaiah 19:19. And if you add up the Hebrew values, excuse me, for Isaiah chapter 19, verse 19, the Hebrew letters add up to the height of the pyramid in pyramid inches, to give you a clue that that's what it's talking about. The pillar, the witness for the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar at the border thereof. So this guy, Ralph Lyman, figured out that there's a timeline in the pyramid that will give you, at length, the rapture date, so he thought. And so he was, he's going to teach on it. And the way I found out, I had just began to subscribe to a newspaper, the Los Angeles Times, a San Diego County edition of the Los Angeles Times. This man came to the door selling subscriptions, and if you bought the subscription, you would get for free this giant book of the last 100 years of front page newspaper reprints. I mean, it was just so beautiful, and I had to have one. So I went ahead and signed up for this Los Angeles Times, San Diego County edition. And I'm thumbing through it one day, a week or so later. And here was this ad, quarter size, very expensive newspaper ad, saying the Great Pyramid in Egypt is God's time capsule in stone, and it shows the history of all mankind's doings right up until our day and the prophecies of when the end times will begin, starting with the rapture of God's people, and no dangling. So this guy's going to do a talk on this. Well, of course, I thought it was God's providence that I started that newspaper when I did, and that it was all so that I could go to this. I would have never known about it if I hadn't had that newspaper. So I see this in the paper, I clear my calendar, I drive all the way up to the northern parts of Los Angeles, a couple hours one way, and I attend this meeting. The man gives a date, October the 14th, 1987. He then has another meeting a week or so later, just a few days before that date would come on the calendar. Well, I was so enthusiastic, I talked to everybody I knew, and I brought a group of people with me to go hear this last talk, and he convinced every one of us that this was going to happen. He had so many things lining up on that date that just was beyond impossible. Just to give you an example, it's so long ago now, but the leader in Babylon at that time, I think it was Saddam Hussein, was rebuilding Babylon. It was in the newspapers. He had paper clippings. It was in the news. And this was going to be where the Antichrist was going to set up his earth rule from. It looked feasible when you saw the stories in the newspaper. He said he's doing this now so that it'll be ready by the time this all happens. I mean, there was stories like that everywhere you looked. He had so much information that looked believable. And so I just fell for it hook, line, and sinker. And I took my vacation from my full-time job during this period so that I could be ready and help people, try to get the word out. And people thought I was nuts, but a lot of them believed me. And we all looked at the skies, and nothing happened. So after this experience, I mean, I didn't quit my job, and I didn't put on white robes and go on the roof or something, but anything short of that I almost did it. I was really believing it. Nothing happened. So a year later, the book came out, 88 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming Back in 1988. I didn't even look at that book. I didn't even believe it. I was still reeling from the disappointment the previous year, so I just said, yeah, right, okay. And I let it go by. But a lot of people did get caught up in the 88 Reasons thing. I never even read it. I don't even know what the reasons were. I just sort of maybe saw it online or something, glanced at it at some point later, maybe. But I didn't fall for that one. In fact, I didn't look at another prophecy book or person, or I practically just quit going to church. I didn't stop believing, but I didn't want to hear about it anymore. So finally, a number of years later, I decided to see what those Christians were saying about the end times stuff again. So from 1987, it was now 1995. And I went into a bookstore and I found a book by M.J. Agee, Marilyn Agee, called The End of the Age. And she picked a new rapture date. Hers was, I think, May 31st, 1998. 3 years yet future. Well, I read the book, I devoured it, and I started buying copies and handing them out, and I started all over again. I thought this was it. But when I first fell for the pyramid guy, Ralph Lyman's thing, a good buddy of mine asked me, he went with, and he heard all the information, and then when the date went by and nothing happened, he asked me, didn't you even pray and ask God? Why didn't you ask God? And I sheepishly admitted, no, I didn't. I was like Moses when he said, you can be to us instead of eyes. I took this guy's word for it. Well, I did it all over again with Marilyn Agee. I figured, well, she's a lot smarter than me, and she's got it all figured out. And her book, she had every which way to prove her date. And I believed it 100%. So I went through it all again. For 3 years, I led up to that date. And I actually called her on the phone that day. It was a Sunday. I was at church. And a guy who kept saying to me, "No man knows the day or the hour," he thought it was sort of funny. And it's like, well, when's your rapture going to happen? We're at church, and church service was either over or in between services or something. So we're in the office. He was the music leader. And he invites me. He looks her up on the internet. He says, "Would you like to give her a call?" Her phone number was there. So he dials her number, hands me the phone, and I get on there and start talking to her machine, Marilyn Agee's machine, and she picks up, and I got to talk to her. And I said, "Well, when's the rapture? What's going on?" She sort of laughs and says, "Well, I'm watching just like you." But she made me feel a little bit better when she said she first came up with that date in like the late 60s. And she's been watching all these years for 1998. So I was like, wow, you've been watching a lot longer than I have. And so she said, well, all we could do is keep watching. So I got off the phone with her. Nothing happened. So every year from that moment on, that's when eventually I realized there was a lot of people on the internet that watch for these things too. I found the Five Doves, and I started, reading that every day. And in those days, John Ting was putting up letters every single day, except Sunday. And then he reversed it eventually, and he only puts new letters up on Sunday. And so anywhere I could, I was looking for any information, because where your treasure is, that's where your heart is. I wanted the rapture as bad as I wanted anything in this world, or more than anything in this world. So you can understand, I went through failed prediction after failed prediction, and I learned not to put too much weight on dates that people set. And one of the things that this music director said to me when he said, "No man knows the day or the hour," well, see, they have answers for that. Gene Scott used to say there was 2 different Greek words to know something. In English, you just know or you don't know. It's to know. But in the Greek, there's a specific word that means to know something as the result of careful study. And then there's a different word that's just to know intrinsically. You don't need to even look into it. You just automatically know. And he said that's the word Jesus used when he said no man knows automatically without having to look into it, the day or the hour. But you can know, different Greek word, as the result of careful, diligent study. That's why he said, you don't automatically know, therefore look into it, and then you can know as the result of diligent study when it is even at the door. So I said, see, you can know. It's just a different kind of knowing. It'd be like if a professor at a university said to the class on the first day of a new semester, you might think you're an expert on this subject, but you don't know what I'm going to reveal, so therefore pay attention. Don't just come in here and think you're going to pass the class based on something you think you already know. You're going to need to show up, you're going to need to pay attention, and then you'll be able to get an A and pass the class, because I'm going to reveal to you, if you take notes and carefully study, you can know how to get an A in this class. That's what Jesus was saying. You don't automatically just know anything. You think you're not going to know this. But if you pay attention, it can be figured out through careful, diligent study. So that's what gave me the feeling that I had to get around that no man knows the day or the hour. I said, well, you don't know the right, you got to know which Greek word he's using. That seemed to make sense to me. However, this guy brought up a scripture I hadn't considered. He says, what about the one where Jesus says, I'm coming at a time when you think not? Oh, well, that just means, oh. And I was like, I don't know how to get around that one. But I think he said, I'm coming at an hour when you think not. So maybe he meant you can know when it's even right at the door, but you still won't know exactly what hour. I don't know. But I thought, well, you got a good point there, Maybe you can know the season, but not the hour. Because he's coming at an hour when you think not. So, and even Christine will say that. You don't know which hour. Could it be the first, which night watch, or which hour? We don't know. But she's convinced it's July 17th regardless. And Pearl, same thing. Well, I've been through this so many times I've lost count. And I've learned not to put too much weight on it, because the letdown and the disappointment, having to get up and go do earthly junk after you've been thinking you're out of here, it's very, very trying. It's difficult. And I can't help but think God intended it to be like that. That's why Jesus said to the Philadelphia church, "Thou hast little strength, and you've not denied my name, and you've kept the word, my word, not denied my name. Therefore, because you've kept the word of my endurance." And other translations have ruined it and said, "Because you kept the word, my word, to endure patiently." He didn't say that. Us enduring patiently is not the key. Us keeping the word of his endurance. He paid the price to get us in, and we keep the word of his endurance. And because we've done that, he also will keep us from the hour of temptation, which will come on all the world to try them that dwell upon the earth. We're getting out of here. We just don't know exactly when, but we have to be ready at all times. Is it going is it going to be this July 17th? I would sure love it. I hope so. But I can't be absolutely sure. Because the reasons that are given, I've gone to God and I've asked him, if this is of you, please confirm it for me. And so far he hasn't, you know. He wants me to watch. He wants me to be ready always. And sorry for those who think, but George, my buddy, he asked me, "Didn't you even pray about this?" And I was realizing, no, I just thought they knew. I thought they figured it out. I thought they're smarter than me. They seem pretty confident, so I'll just go. Here's the problem, though. There's some guy out there who's been making predictions now for, I don't know, the last several years. He makes these long videos and so full of information you can't even keep up. I don't even remember his name or his channel. Sorry, I should have, but they all get just one big blur after a while. I get all the different channels mixed up, which one is which, until I click on it and go, oh yeah, it's this guy. Well, there's a guy out there who's saying that Christine and Pearl are of a Jezebel spirit because they don't match up with his date. He's picking something like in November this year. But he's picked other dates that have gone by, and he had just as many reasons, as long as your arm, a list of reasons why his date was so the absolute, convoluted, perfect, undeniable proofs that it's this, that, and the other date. And then it goes by. So he comes up with a new absolutely undeniable proof that it's this other date. And I've heard it so many times. There was people on the Five Doves who kept coming up with dates. You remember Renee Moses, everybody? She thought she had the whole thing figured out. Puzzle pieces. And she was very compelling and seemed sincere. She seems to have disappeared, but it's been a long journey, and I think we're supposed to be watching always, but I'm not going to be too disappointed if July 17th goes by, and I don't think I'm going to be left behind if I don't put all my faith in that date. I'm going to be watching like any other day. I think it could come at a time when we think not. I think we just need to be ready always. I wish, I want to get out of here. I want to be immortal. I want as bad as any of you out there. But I don't think we need to feel condemned if we don't buy into somebody's date. If we don't, because all these people who say, well, I asked God for a confirmation and then I saw the number 17. Yeah, I've heard that all before, 100 times. Every other date, people have had confirmations the same exact way. I almost feel like it works a little bit, like any spiritual matter. If you open yourself up to believe something, it'll start to come true for you. People say, well, I didn't believe in, Ouija boards till I tried one. Sure, they'll work for you. The demonic spirit world is open to, all you have to do is give them an opportunity. And I think if you start to believe in a date and you ask for confirmations, you'll get them. Doesn't mean it's from God. Test the spirits. People can be very sincere sounding. And I know that Christine and Pearl have both said, if you don't believe this date, you're under the condemnation of God. And I have to say, wait a minute. Lord, is that true? And I don't feel like it is. I've been following God a long time. I know the voice of the one who speaks to me. And he hasn't told me that at all. He's not condemning like that. You know? He's not fear. He doesn't put you under fear in that kind of a manner. Because I would be fearful if I thought not buying into somebody's date could get me left behind. I'd be like, well, in all honesty, I'm not buying into it. I can't see it. I don't understand how. I know the blood moons and the tetrads and all that is real. I believe that the Revelation 12 sign was something real. And I believe that these are there for our understanding that we're in the season. I mean, you can't deny that. But how that can bring you to an exact day, that just every which way I've looked at it, it still feels extremely arbitrary. For example, Pearl uses the 153, which I wholeheartedly believe the 153 is an extremely significant number. And I see that number all the time. You know, randomly I'll see that number. And I know it's a rapture number. And I know that, I'm talking here, my cat's trying to get my attention. I know that there's the resurrection trinity factor. Any number, a third of all numbers, will resurrect to 153. It's in that book by that guy who, sorry I don't have his name on my, a book called The Pattern in the Prophecy. I can give you that much. The Pattern in the Prophecy. He tells all about that number 153 and the fish that were caught in the net. And that's a third of all mankind is going to be in that number. And then, you know, you can write that number. A third of any whole is 33.3. And the threes go off as far as you want them to go. 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. It's a third of the whole. That leaves 2/3, which can be numbered as 66.666666. There you have it. You're either in the 33, Jesus number, the age that he was when he gave his life for all of us, and conquered death and took the keys to death, hell, and the grave. You're either in that number. Oh, I want to be in that number. Or you're in the other number, 666. Your choice. But that doesn't mean you can lay it down on some sort of calendar and say, he's absolutely therefore has to come on this date. Or if it does, I didn't see it. I mean, I'll be happy if it happens, as long as I don't get left behind. I mean, I'll be watching, and if that's the date, I'll be watching. But I can't absolutely, I don't know. I haven't gotten that confirmation. In fact, when I ask him, he gives me this smile, and he kind of gives me like, he doesn't confirm it. He just, what do you think? What does it sound like to you? It's kind of like he asks me. And I said, it sounds to me like all the ones who have come before. I mean, I've fallen for them. There's been some very compelling people out there predicting dates, every one of which has gone by. And I never believed Harold Camping, not once. I first used to listen to Harold Camping when I first gave my life strongly to God. He was on the radio, family radio, and it didn't take me long to figure out he's really was coming from left field. He had so many weird interpretations and things. I stopped listening to him early on, and when he came back into prominence, I was like, you mean this guy's still around? So when he came up with his prediction, I shook my head. I said, I don't think so. I don't think so. And sure enough, it went by. And I'll never forget the clip of him going, I'm flabbergasted. Nothing happened. And he didn't last much longer after that. He was an old man by then anyway. But I just think I've heard all this before. And it'll be exciting and interesting. But if we're still here, you know, keep watching. That's about all I can say. I'd love to be wrong. I'd love for this to be it, as long as I don't get left behind. I'm tired. I want to go. But I'm not convinced from anything I've looked at. And this time, finally, I'm not just taking someone else's word for it. I'm wanting to be cautious and just have a wait-and-see attitude like I've had for the last numerous predictions that come every year. They come every year. This is the year, this is the year. Man, I've seen the books and I've read the online stuff. People have been so sincere. There was one lady, she thought it was 2007. She wrote a book at her own expense and gave it away for free, and I don't know what happened to her, but she cashed in her chips on that date, and nothing happened. That was 2007, people. She was so convinced that was it. I've seen so many examples of that sort of thing. Is this just another one? Well, we'll have to wait and see. That's all I can say.